He poisons his rivals, he steals billions, and yet, he is completely untouchable.
Sitting on top of the world's largest nuclear arsenal, Vladimir Putin is guarded by a massive, 5-layer shadow army, a force so deeply paranoid they literally test his food before he takes a single bite.
So, you've got to ask yourself, how does a former spy just hijack a superpower? How does one man crush billionaires, rewrite the laws of a nation, and survive 25 years at the top without a single scratch?
Well, the answer isn't just fear. It comes down to a dark psychological masterclass, a hidden, unwritten contract, and a secret circle of elites pulling the strings of global chaos.
Let's dive right into this explainer and completely break down the exact architecture of absolute power.
Section 1. Taming the Oligarchs and the Grand Bargain.
Okay, let's rewind a bit to the late 1990s. Back then, a really weak Russian state was essentially owned by a small group of ridiculously wealthy businessmen, the oligarchs. But in the summer of 2000, that entire dynamic flipped. Putin actually gathered these billionaires at Stalin's former dacha and offered them a very simple, non-negotiable deal, the Grand Bargain. He told them, you can keep your immense wealth, but you stay entirely out of politics. Period. Pre-Putin, the oligarchs controlled the state. Under Putin, the state controls them.
And for those who didn't listen, the consequences were swift. Media moguls like Vladimir Gusinsky and Boris Berezovsky refused to play by these new rules, and they were quickly forced into exile, with the state just seizing their TV networks. Then, in 2003, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was literally the richest man in Russia at the time, was dramatically arrested by special forces right on an airport runway. By 2004, his massive oil empire, Yukos, was swallowed whole by the state-owned Rosneft. Basically, Putin transferred all this immense wealth directly into the hands of the state and his close loyalists. And this is absolutely crucial to understand, because it set a permanent precedent. In this system, loyalty is the only currency that actually buys your survival.
Section 2. The Siloviki and the Shield. An obsession with security. So with the billionaires tamed, Putin needed to fill that power vacuum. He did it with his own people, a tight inner circle of ex-KGB loyalists known as the Siloviki. To actually overthrow this system, a rival couldn't just take down one agency. No way. They would have to simultaneously outmaneuver 5 independent, heavily armed intelligence branches. You've got the FSB handling domestic surveillance to stop uprisings, the SVR running foreign intelligence, the GRU watching over the military to prevent any rogue generals, then there's the FSO acting as a massive 50,000-member personal guard, and finally the National Guard specifically built to crush domestic protests. It's an absolute fortress.
And when you look closely at the FSO's protocols, it's a level of Hollywood-style paranoia that just proves Putin leaves absolutely nothing to chance. A mobile lab literally tests all food ingredients before they're even cooked, the food itself supplied by secret state farms. They have trained tasters sample the meals first. And, this is wild, but when he travels abroad, his biological waste is collected and flown back to Russia. Why? So foreign intelligence agencies can't analyze his DNA to figure out the exact state of his health.
Now, analysts point out that this immense fear is actively maintained outside the country too. Alleged specialized intelligence groups, like the infamous Unit 29155, neutralize threats using exotic, untraceable poisons, things like polonium-210 and the nerve agent Novichok. It sends a very clear, chilling message to anyone even thinking about defecting: you are never out of reach. Section 3. The Illusion of Democracy, a Psychological Masterclass.
Here's the thing. You can't rule 140 million people for a quarter of a century with just spies and poison, right? You have to control the narrative. This brings us to a really fascinating concept called sovereign democracy. Designed by political strategist Vladislav Surkov, this system allows the state to simulate democratic institutions. So you have elections, you have parliaments, you even have opposition parties. But it's all managed. The state literally funds fake opposition groups. They make a ton of noise on TV, they look like real opponents, but they never actually threaten the regime's grip on power. It's brilliant in a dark kind of way.
And it all rests on this unwritten social contract that keeps the general public docile. Remember, after the brutal economic collapse of the 1990s, the Russian public just craved stability. So the deal was simple. The state guarantees security and a basic standard of living, and in return, the public agrees to stay completely out of governance. And this mindset is heavily reinforced by state media. They constantly promote anti-Western philosophies to keep the population united against an outside enemy.
Section 4. Weaponizing national tragedies, the centralization of power.
Let's look at how this control over the narrative actually translates into hard political strategy. In September 2004, Chechen militants took over a school in Beslan. The siege ended in absolute tragedy. Over 330 people died, including 186 children. Just 12 days after this horrific attack, the administration capitalized on the nation's fear. Putin argued that internal political weakness was what enabled the terrorists in the first place. He used this crisis to legally strip economy away from Russia's 89 regions. Almost overnight, directly elected governors became appointed employees of the Kremlin. The entire map of Russia was put right into his pocket.
Section 5. The ultimate insurance policy. Global untouchability.
So, how does this whole system survive massive international pushback, historical economic sanctions, and an ongoing grueling war? Well, it mostly comes down to this number right here, 6,257. That staggering number is Russia's estimated count of nuclear warheads. It acts as the ultimate geopolitical shield. It fundamentally prevents any direct foreign military intervention. And it's exactly why this entire geopolitical standoff impacts every single person watching this explainer right now.
Analysts suggest that by actively promoting these apocalyptic weapons, the regime essentially holds the global community at a standoff. They're quick to showcase the Sarmat ICBMs, the terrifying Poseidon underwater drones that are literally designed to create radioactive tsunamis, and the Dead Hand system, which is an automated retaliatory network. Basically, the message is clear. If Putin falls, he's threatening to take everyone else down with him.
And this instinct for survival extends right into the economy. Despite facing what are arguably the toughest sanctions in human history, the system just adapted. When the West tried to cripple the economy, Russia pivoted into a massive war economy. When their oil exports were blocked, no problem. They simply built a sanction-evading shadow fleet of ships to keep the oil moving. And when they faced diplomatic isolation, they pivoted their trade entirely away from Europe, focusing on Asia and the global South. Against all odds, the money just keeps flowing to the loyalists.
Even when the ultimate insider threat finally emerged, it was handled with clinical precision. Look at what analysts called the Prigozhin precedent. In June 2023, the Wagner Group mutinied, directly challenging the Russian military apparatus. It was a massive shock. A deal was brokered the very next day to stop their advance on Moscow. But then, exactly 2 months later, Yevgeny Prigozhin dies in a mysterious jet crash. The system neutralized its biggest internal threat permanently, and then just absorbed his Prev army right back into the state.
Which leaves us with this final thought. With his system legally secured until 2036, the only remaining threat to Vladimir Putin might literally just be time itself. He has built an absolute fortress of intelligence agencies, nuclear deterrence, and economic workarounds. But what happens to this highly engineered, uniquely personalized state of Russian politics when the architect is finally gone? That, my friends, is the billion-dollar question. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helped you map out exactly how this incredibly complex web of power operates.